Greetings all. Welcome back to another episode of the Coptimizer Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Flannelly, retired Chief of Police, and like I say, all around kind of wannabe Renaissance man. I dabble in a lot of things, and I'm a master of none. But today I've got Chief John Clair. John is chief on the East Coast, and I'll let him jump into that. But John called me out on LinkedIn the other day on a post, and so I sent him a direct message and said, "Hey, let's chat about this." And the conversation really is evolving around technology in policing. And John's written several papers, very fascinating. The 5 dimensions of better policing is where we're going to kick this off. But we went on a lot of tangents when we jumped on a quick call to sort out our differences. And we found, I think, that we're probably more similar than we are dissimilar. But thanks for being here, John. Appreciate it.
No, Patrick, I appreciate it. I'm sorry for my my incivility on LinkedIn, but I told you the word that got used is the word that I think doesn't really belong in any human enterprise, and that's efficiency, right? That's a machine word that's used to describe processes and mechanics, and I get it, right? We want efficient cars, but I get frustrated when we start talking about efficiency with people. And so I think what we talked about is I think I'm the loyal opposition in modern law enforcement to technology. Like it's a loving opposition, right? I just want to be the person on the other side of the debate. I read all the wrong books, and this shapes my thinking. And so I love this conversation because I'm not totally against it. We talked about that.
Right.
I'm not totally against it. I just think we're naive and we don't talk about it in a real way. So I'm excited to talk about it in a real way.
All right. Well, the post was about real-time crime centers and some of the work that I had done in building we don't call it a real-time crime center at my former agency. We call it our analysis and response center because we don't have the need to run a real-time crime center. We're a very busy police department, but we still found that staffing it 24/7 wasn't necessarily the best use of resources. So we found a different way to do it. But before we jump into all that, tell us a little bit about yourself, and let's find out why you are kind of a throwback.
So I grew up in Southern Ohio. My family's from Eastern Kentucky. My dad was a policeman, so was his, and so was his. They were also auto workers. I joined the Army right out of high school and graduated from military police school in 1999. I didn't know it then, but right on the cusp of world change.
Right.
And you were a veteran too, right, Patrick?
Yep. Probably a decade before that, though. Air Force Security Police.
Air Force. So I'm sure just like back then, maybe the Army, when I joined, it was kind of pretend, like it wasn't really real. We were using all this mix of like Korean War era sleeping bags with, Desert Storm flak jackets with BDUs. It was a lot of pretend. And then I went to the country club of the United States Army, Fort Sam Houston, Texas, which was an open post right in the middle of San Antonio.
Been there.
Then I spent a year. Yep, a beautiful place, doing all garrison law enforcement. And so then I went to the Republic of Korea, and that's when September 11th happened, of course, and the world changed. And then I came back to Fort Myer, Virginia, and I was a canine handler attached to the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, and then went into civilian law enforcement from there. Mostly small town stuff. I worked in Dumfries, Virginia, and then later for Prince William County. And then now I'm the chief of police of the town of Marion in Southwest Virginia. And so it's kind of interesting growing up in Ohio, when I joined the Army, the picture in my head of Texas was like the Alamo sitting out in the desert somewhere. And so when I get to San Antonio, I said, "Hey, where's the Alamo?" And they're like, "Oh, it's right downtown. It's about yay tall." Anyway, and so same thing with Korea. I had like tropical in my head. It's like Canada, It's ice cold, it's full of that. And then so when I come to Virginia, I'm thinking Gone with the Wind, and I go to Northern Virginia, and it's very cosmopolitan, very busy area. So now I think I've settled in Appalachia. I love it down here, but I've been in law enforcement in one way or another about 25 years.
Yeah, so that's cool. I mean, that gives you a really broad perspective on policing. And that was something that we can chat a little bit more about as we get going, because I think that has shaped maybe some of your ideas around policing, having worked in a very large agency in a metropolitan area and then moving to a smaller police department. I don't think most Americans truly appreciate or understand, even comprehend the vast differences in policing, in police departments. I mean, really, just even in a 1 or 2 county area, like where I work, we're halfway between, or where I worked, halfway between Chicago and Indianapolis. So you have this huge metropolitan area, an hour and 20 minutes north, another one an hour south. And then we're really the largest municipal area in between. We've got a university town here, Purdue University here, boiler up. We're looking good right now in the tourney, finally. But but we have 200 employees at our police department, and then several of the 40 to 50 officer size departments. In 10 minutes away, 5 minutes away, you have a 2-man department. And then you have a town marshal in a small town, and, rural areas, all within,
Patrick, Yeah, I was just going to say, those size agencies, by the way, and I'm going to get the stat a little wrong, but I'm in the ballpark here. 80% of police departments are under 50. Half of those are under 10.
Yeah.
So the vast majority of policing is what you're describing.
Yeah, and each year I go to our Indiana Law Enforcement Academy, and I teach a wellness class at our new chief school. And every year it's I always find it fascinating, because I used to think, like, man, big chiefs, from agencies like Indy Metro, South Bend, Evansville, Fort Wayne, like some of these larger cities in Indiana. I'm like, man, I think my problems are bad. Like, theirs must be 100 times worse. But then you start talking to chiefs from really small towns, and you're like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know which is worse. I think maybe I found a sweet spot, because, if you 10 to 15 officers, you have an operational requirement as a chief.
Right.
You're kind there. You don't have people to do some of these tasks that can free up, bandwidth to focus on certain things. You've got to be able to do it all. So, I mean, I think everybody has their own challenges, but that's anyway. I think that's probably a good segue into what we really wanted to talk about today, anyway, which is
technology.
I'm a huge fan of technology, and apparently I triggered you in that post with something that I said.
Right. Right. No, I'll tell you where I start with it. So I'm not educated as a police professional. I did my undergraduate in religion and the humanities. I'm also a seminary dropout. So shout out to Greenville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. I view myself as Greenville Seminary's most successful dropout. So when you in seminary, and this is an important thing, in seminary, they always tell you that if you can do anything else, you should. And what they mean by that, and it took me a while to figure this out, that if your heart is not completely, totally, absolutely committed to the task, that you don't have any business being there. And what I discovered is that I was kind of doing both, and maybe trying to decide which way I was going to go. And what I discovered is that my heart was really in policing, and I'm kind of all in. But that education gave me a very humanistic disposition in every single question. And so as I started to get into policing more deeply, and especially when I became the chief of police, and I started to think how I wanted to shape a police department into the community, then suddenly we're on this massive slide towards all things technological, and it makes me uneasy. Now, as a fair disclaimer, I listen to music on vinyl. If it doesn't get pressed into a record, it doesn't exist to me. I read books in hardback and paperback form. So I guess I was predisposed already, but then some of that kind of made it worse. And so I'm not against technology. I'm just against like I said in the article, the throngs of zealots who imagine what technology can do, but not what it can undo.
Yeah. And so that's kind of where we're at this intersection right now, I think, in society. It really has probably been probably started late 90s, really, if you think about it.
Right.
And it's just been accelerating since then. And, in 2014, we started to see this trend in recruitment and retention, it started to move downward, meaning less people were, submitting applications to enter into this profession. The retirements started to accelerate. And I think for a lot of reasons, and I think one that gets overlooked a lot is just because the COPS grants from the mid 90s, right? That,
Right.
we really expanded policing in America in the mid 90s. And I'm a byproduct of that. I started my career at my agency in 1995 on COPS grants. And so by 2015, that's 20 years. Now all those police officers that got hired in that area are eligible for retirement. And if you don't sustain that type of federal funding and program, then I think it's just natural that we're going to see a decline in the number of officers. So, yeah, I mean, and then you have Ferguson, a few other incidents, and then 2020, everybody remembers that. And now we're in this position where a lot of agencies are, staff 20-30% short of what they were a decade ago. And so you have this demand on police services that's not going away, right? People may call for the defunding of the police, but they'll still call the police when they need them.
Patrick, I've said that. Now I don't want to make it political. I'm just going to say this: the defund the police talking point has created the largest single salary and benefits increase in law enforcement history.
Yep.
We are now paying more for the police than we ever have as a society, because it's supply and demand. Just that's what we're talking about, right?
Right.
And the shortage now, and you tell me when you were chief, the shortage now makes our previous hiring dynamics seem idiotic, like passing up on applications because they weren't completely filled out. That one still bothers me, but you know what I mean? Like we created all these barriers, like, you're supposed to staple it, not paperclip it, right? So we're just making all these snap judgments, right? Because we have hundreds of applications. And now it's like, hey, they mostly filled it out. Let's see what we got.
I just commented yesterday on another one of those, because kind of like, and I can't help myself sometimes, but the reduction of standards, physical fitness standards, think they like the complete doing away of physical fitness standards. What I find is I call it the race to the bottom, in that we start trying to make excuses and justifying reasons why we should lower standards in an effort to get ourselves to a number. And I generally think most agencies, this number is completely arbitrary. I don't think people do staffing studies that are sufficient for them to know if they're right sized or not. That's a whole nother conversation we could dive into. Because if you ask any police chief or any police officer, hey, how was your day? It was busy. It doesn't matter if you're in a department where you're running 30 calls for service or one where you're running 3. In their mind, I was busy all day. Like, well, what did you get? Right. What did you accomplish today? Oh, well, lots of stuff. Well, like what? Well, I did police work. And so when you start kind of digging into the weeds and you start asking better questions, then you start to realize, and so again, this kind of brings us back to this real-time crime environment, because ultimately where we're heading is the demand for services are either steady or increasing. And we've seen that, and maybe I'm using an N of 1 example of my own agency, just studying our own CAD calls over the last 20 years. But but the number of officers that can handle those calls are declining. And I think maybe this is where you and I got into our where we're coming at this discussion from maybe a couple different perspectives. But
Right.
my point was in this this post, which was really about the
Wasn't it about like
efficiency
an
of,
accident that somebody saw on a camera and they dealt
yeah,
with it
yeah, it was Dalton Webb was his
remotely?
name. Yeah,
Yeah,
he had the post and he talked about how they solved a crash or they worked a crash without sending an officer.
right.
And
He was super proud of that.
yeah, well, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah,
And
I was
obviously now
like,
I realize like you're like, I don't like this idea. And again, I think and so my example, and this is kind of where and this is where my eyes got open to this possibility. Um uh, and it was through the only at-fault crash in my entire life. So after I had read that, so and that's basically what they did. Just so for people that hadn't seen that post, what happened was they had a crash at an intersection. They had a camera there. They had an officer working in the real-time crime center. He was able to use the camera to run the plate, get the information, um, get the information from the other driver, fill out the crash report form, and basically do everything without having to have a face-to-face interaction. So,
right. And
um,
that's the part that's the part that kind of pushes on me
yeah,
because Patrick, where I'm at is this. The foundation of policing is relational. Trust and legitimacy is built that way. That's what the jumping off point for everything else. And so, like, I think some people see that as like, wow, super efficient, got it done, didn't even have to send anybody. I see that as a lot of missed opportunity. That's my gut on it. Not that
yeah,
I disagree. I think the real time crime center is cool. Get the tag, get all the stuff, but then I would prefer that be delivered personally. But you're right. What do we do when we don't have enough people to send?
yeah. You
Yeah,
don't send anyone, and you tell
yeah,
them, hey, you tell them over the phone, exchange information, have a great day. And that's what a lot of police departments, your major cities, have been doing that for over a decade, if not
right,
longer.
right,
There's a lot of, and so that example brought me back to when I first I have USA auto insurance, and I'm in a brand new minivan with my kids on a Sunday morning, driving in through the church parking lot, still half asleep, and the turning radius on this thing was unbelievable. Better than my previous one. So when I went to go around a car that was parked, I turned that wheel and my turning radius had changed, and I wound up sideswiping a parked car in a parking lot. Like all the years I drove a squad car, Signal 10,
right,
I
right.
never had a crash that was my own fault. I got rear-ended a few times, but um, I was just like, dang. So I've got a brand new insurance company, and what do I do? So they had an app. I jump on their app, and short version is through the app on their phone, I took pictures of the damage to my car, the damage to the other car, took pictures of the license plates, filled out all of my information on the app real quickly. My son had run in and grabbed, the other owner of the other car. I got their information real quick. And within 10, 15 minutes, I had submitted my claim paperwork. The police department wasn't coming for private property crash.
Right.
So the jurisdiction where this happened, but that was it. And then like 30 minutes later, I got a call from a claim rep, said everything complete. Looks like we got everything. We'll be in touch. They sent me some instructions for how to get my car repaired. And within 3 weeks, my claim was settled. No back and forth, no arguing. It was really efficient. And it just really made me think like, wow, um, we got all of the data points that we needed, or the insurance company did, right? So we got driver's information, we got plate information, vehicle description, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, why, maybe why can't we do this from a police department perspective? because what I also found, and I did some informal surveys on this with people. I'm like, would you rather, with community members, would you rather an officer come and handle this crash, even if it might be a 30, 60, 90-minute delay? Because let's face it, private property, property damage crashes on private property is what I'm trying to say, where there's no
Right.
injuries. um, that's not a high priority call. And so you're going to get placed in the queue where it's appropriate. So it might be 60 to 90 minutes where why couldn't people just fill out a form on a mobile app and be on their way? And now
Right.
I get what you're saying though, because there's the danger in this. Now here's an opportunity for an officer to go have a face-to-face interaction, and and I might have to add the caveat, right? Like, if it's the right officer in the right mood, you can have a
Right.
really positive interaction here. But if it's the guy that's like got 4 calls in the queue, and now, in his head, like, why am
Well,
I got to go to another call, and then they go and they get short and they have a negative interaction. And also one more thing, we all know that a lot of these interactions lead with, there's suspended drivers, there's dope in the car, there's something else going on there, and an inquisitive, curious professional police officer is going to look at this in multiple layers, and this
right.
might lead to something a little bit more,
Well, and I guess, and I accuse me of being a little too philosophical about it. I have two philosophical assumptions that I think are inarguable. Number one, technology generally is not time saving. Now, I know that pushes against every single one of your instincts, but hear me out.
all right.
Technology has always had the promise of saving humans time so they can do more human things. Always. It's always been said, oh, the washing machine will just save, people at home all this time. They predicted in the 50s and 60s that by now you and I would just be on vacation, that machines would be doing all the work. But we know that's not true, because email saves time it immediately gobbles back up through the management of the system itself. It lowers the barrier for communication. People don't wait to call you until you get home. They'll send you just about anything at any moment. And I'm sure you, just like me, I dread sorting through my email inbox every single morning. And I spend more
Not as
time
much as I used
managing.
to.
Yeah, well, but you know what I mean? Like, and so I'm saying, I think that's a myth. Like, and so let's go back to the efficiency of accident response. If we can be more efficient there, we'll suddenly have all this time to do other things. I think that is a myth. And I'd love to see some study to prove me wrong. And the second one is that technology is not additive, it's ecological, right? So technology, and you and I talked about, right? Like when television was introduced into American society, we didn't have American culture plus television. Television became American culture, just like cars, just like everything else. So I think it's naive for us to say, hey, let's start doing this accident response remotely, because what we'll have is still basic police. And this is how you see a lot of it cast, right? If you still want a police officer, you can have one, right? But there's also this additive. It will simply be backfed into the existence of what we're doing. And I think we see it time and time again, right? The patrol car. We didn't get foot beats plus patrol cars. Policing just became patrol.
Right.
911 or right, radio dispatch. We didn't get the call blocks plus radio dispatch. It just became radio dispatch, 911 response. We didn't get foot beats and old-fashioned policing, and every now and again 911 response. That's what it became, and that's what I fear. I think the technology is cool and necessary in many cases, but if we're not at least being critical a little bit, I think we risk headlong going into it and then being shocked at the response. I'm reading, Patrick, I think I was telling you, I'm reading this book right now called Police Visibility, and it's about the false promise of body cameras. Now, follow me here. The author, I think, is a progressive critic of policing. And this author has said, in the rush towards accountability, we have now handed the police the largest government surveillance apparatus in human history. And now both the police and the citizens are performing for the camera. And you know that, and that's true. We didn't get policing plus camera. It's a whole new thing.
Well, I'll add to that because I agree wholeheartedly. And I will tell you that one of the first things I told when we rolled out body cameras, of course, I've been looking at them when I took over as chief in 2012. We were researching body cameras already, and there were VView was the big player back then. There was a company out of Atlanta that was using Google Glass as a version, and there were a couple others. Axon, I think, what formerly Taser, was kind of new into the field as well. But in 2012, kind of to your point, right? And maybe you'll like this perspective. I did not want to make a purchase or adopt body cameras because the technology was not going to be, it wasn't going to enhance an officer's ability to do their job. It was actually going to detract from it because they didn't have CAD integration yet. That wasn't even a thing. And so what that meant is, if you're out handling calls, for those that aren't familiar with body cameras, you're collecting all of this data that has to be stored someplace. And in order to store it, it's like property and evidence. It's got to be sorted and categorized. And so you can retrieve it when you need it. And so it's not as, for the average person that just is watching cops on a Friday night or something, or watching the news,
Right.
well, where's my video? Like, I want to see the video, which I'll come back to that perspective too. But there is a whole system that has to be built in order to save that. And guess who becomes the main administrator of that system? The officer in the car. And so, hey, after I'm done with this call, or worse, if I work a 10, 12-hour shift, now at the end of my day, I go in and now I've got to start looking at my videos and put this video goes with this traffic stop under this case number. This video goes with this arrest under this case number. And, and so these categorization processes, we did just back of the, napkin type of calculations. We figured 30, 60, 90 minutes in some point, just to sort and categorize. And I was like, so then I did the math. I was like, in 1 year, the amount of overtime or the amount of manpower hours dedicated to that task alone was going to be double the cost of the body camera program.
Right. Well, so, and I'm not against cameras. Yeah, I'm not against cameras. I've used one my whole career. In '99, we had VCR vehicle cameras. You used to have to go to the desk sergeant and get a new tape to put in there. And of course, it's the Army, right? So it's extra bureaucratic. So there's all kinds of, systems in place to do all of that. Then I use the DVR in the car where you have that block that you kind of mount and dismount and plug it in and do all that. And I put Axon body cameras in. We don't have them here. We're probably heading that direction. But exactly, right? So you have this thing that's supposed to make things easy, but then the technique apparatus around it is 10 times bigger than the thing itself.
Well, and so it kind of, and that's where, and going back to just the human perspective there. So, that you have to ask the question, well, why does the public want the police to wear body cameras? And what it boiled down to is that, well, we don't trust the police. And so in my Citizens Academy classes, I ask the question all the time, who in here thinks the police should wear body cameras? 9 out of 10 hands go up. Why do you think the police should wear body cameras? So because we want accountability. Oh, what does accountability mean? Well, when the police do something wrong, the easier way to say it was, in aggregate, people felt like the police, absent the body camera, would be prone to do something illegal
Right.
And the body camera would prevent them from doing something illegal, when it's completely opposite. And so,
Right.
and so then you have to. It's like, so then I would go into this process, and I'm sorry for going on a tangent here, but I talk about the hiring process for a police officer and how long, the 3 to 6 month process that it takes, including a polygraph, a deep dive in a background investigation, panel interviews, a psychological evaluation, a physical evaluation, all these things to test and prod and poke and to make sure that the character and integrity is there and what we need. And at the end of all that, I'm going to put them, I'm going to make them go through a year-long training program where we're going to closely supervise them and monitor them before they're ever out on their own. And now you're going to tell me the first time that they're dealing with a criminal on the street, you're going to believe the criminal over the cop.
Right. Well, but we shoot ourselves in the foot on that, and here's how I think we do it.
Oh, yeah. In a lot of different ways.
In a lot of different ways. One of the ways is this, and I'm saying we as just police officers, we want to be treated like professionals. And professionals have systems of expertise and internal accountability. But then as soon as that begins, we actually want to be treated like labor. So we don't want the internal accountability. We want an external system of unionized defense against critique. And I think we have a little kind of cognitive tension with how all that works. So we're mad when the public starts critiquing us because we say, hey, we're professionals. You don't have the expertise to critique us. We're like doctors. Right. We're like doctors. But then when we start to do a process like doctors do, right, we get a hyper defense and say, hold on, right? That's not fair, right? And so I don't know. That's kind of a deeper sociological thing, but it just
a long way to your point, because what I wanted to tell you is that when Axon at the time was the first company that did, I think, get CAD integration to a point where we felt like, okay, it's a net gain, right? And it would be a net positive. Let's just put it that way. And there are a lot of reasons to have body cameras. Not, most of them run contrary to what the public thinks, but and again, kind of going back to that study and what that guy found is, and what we've all found is about within 6 months, officers revert back to baseline anyway. They perform the way that they always did. And now you get a front row seat to, what their performance was. And so there's a lot of ways that internally we can leverage that for improving performance, which comes along with transparency, accountability. But to your point and to that researcher, the day that we rolled them out, I literally told my entire police department, you must now consider yourself an actor in the grand show. And here's what I want you to remember is that these videos will never go away. You have to assume that this video will be here forever. And the question that I really want to challenge you with is, for those of you that have infants or someday you want to have kids or small children at home, in 20 or 30 years when they're curious about dad or mom and how they did the job, what policing was like, when they do a search and they find videos of you, how do you want yourself to be portrayed? Do you want to be the villain or do you want to be the hero? And it's completely up to you.
Yeah, the author would critique our very point here. Because again, I told you he's kind of a progressive reform critic, and he would say it's another tool for the police to do information politics. And he's right.
He's absolutely right. But
exactly, that's exactly it. Just like bystander videos are information politics.
Just like the person standing there on the sidelines videoing us. And
so it was just about that whole ecosystem. And I don't know about you as chief of police, I love reading things that are way out of what I believe, right? Like I want to know what our biggest critic believes. I want to try to understand it. I want to be able to restate what they believe in their own words, because that's how we get to the debate. But like you and I had talked about, just the shift in technology. So you're solidly a Gen Xer. I'm a Zennial, right? So like grew up analog, lived digitally. So when I came in, I think I'm the last generation of police officer to police without a cell phone. So I was on night shift working in Fort Sam, and I would have to drive to the elementary school because they had a payphone outside. And I would use the payphone to call my wife to make sure she got back from work. And then now, so that's how when using the VCR car cam, no MDT, and now look where we are.
Ask an officer that's hired today what a phone booth is.
I'm not
They
sure
won't
there's a
know. A
public
lot of them don't.
payphone.
They don't even know what they are. They're like, well, why would you have that? Like, and
I'm not going to bust out the officer, but one day we had some new hires and we were watching. There was something on TV in the break room. It was an old 60s, 70s cop show, and they're searching a car, and they're doing this car search, and this guy pops up, one of the officers pops up with something and goes, "I got it right here." And I paused it and I said, "Someone tell me what he's holding in his hand." And it was like, nobody had any idea. It was a 35 millimeter film case, the little black tube with the gray top.
I was
And,
a crime scene photographer. Yeah, I know exactly what
right.
it is.
It's got dope or something in it, right? It's got dope or something in it.
Yeah.
But none of them knew what it was. And it just showed the shift. But I don't know. I know I took us off track, but I feel like we are not adequately thinking about the integration of technology and how that creates efficiency, but it might be undercutting the very thing we're trying to solve, and that's legitimacy.
Yeah, and I agree because one of the things that I'm a firm believer in is that in policing we are in the information business, and this is kind of maybe where we agree in some ways. The better information you have, the sooner you have it, the more effective you're going to be as an investigator and as a police officer. I used to use this example of if every investigation was the rung on a ladder, your more complex homicide investigations, maybe a really tall ladder that goes to the top of a building. And your your simple cases might be a step ladder, 3 steps and you're done. If you're in these complex cases, let's just say a shooting, right? And this was an example that was used here locally, right? And I think nationally we're seeing an increase in the number of shooting cases. I think homicides, depending on where you are, up and down for a lot of different reasons. But if you're in an area where you go to the scene and you have someone says, "Yeah, I saw a person shoot a gun, but I didn't get a license plate. I don't really have a good description. There's no shell casings." There's really not a lot you can do with that until you can find pieces of a puzzle that you can start putting things together. But if you go to a case and the person says, "Yes, I saw the shooting. John Smith did it. He was driving a red Camaro, and this is the way he went." Right now, we're halfway. That doesn't mean John Smith did it, but we're halfway there.
Right.
And so the best way to get information is through relationships and people. And if you're not trusted, if you don't have legitimacy, right, and you roll into a neighborhood and investigate these things, then you might get stonewalled, and people will act against their own best interest. In their best interest is to tell you what they saw and what happened, so we can quickly resolve it. But oftentimes they'll say no, and I didn't see anything, and now you're nowhere.
And that a lot of this stuff we know anecdotally because we see the human response to the work we do. So we can do amazing, fantastic work solving a homicide and nobody cares. But if we rescue some kittens from a sewer drain, my Lord, right? Now, there's 2 ways to handle that. You can be cynical about that. You can say that's stupid and be cynical about it, or you can use it to your advantage. which is, and this is why, like I talk about in the article, core competency is the basis of all the trust. People judge us not off of those full court shots or anything like that. It's that basic core response to whatever their problem is and how we solve it. And then that's how we build the trust to do the bigger stuff.
So maybe, and the way you wrote it, because I have that actually highlighted, core competency is the root of professionalism. And I love that expression. And so if with that in mind, maybe there is room for both right. the competent professional who does have trust and legitimacy because the way that he acts and interacts with people, and then you combine them with the best technology and the best equipment, and you train them as a professional to be able to utilize all of those tools and do it in a way that does not, I think, reduce them or reduce the police to this autonomous machine that just comes through.
Right,
hey, it's part of our process. And, so the way I used to say it is, right, number one is you always have to find the best people you can. Hire the best people you can, because that's the most important resource that you're ever going to have in any agency. And then you have to train them in the best way possible, using the best techniques with the best instructors. And then you have to equip them with the best technology and tools that we can provide, right? And then you have to monitor and supervise them and manage them in a way to ensure that we're putting out the best product. I mean, it sounds really simple when you say it like that.
Yeah. This is why, like in the article, I don't want to jump right to it, but these are my 5 personal imperatives. These are all me. These are what I want to see in my police department. And I think these are the key to success, at least in my area or in a small agency. So the first one, right? The essence of policing is an analog endeavor. It's human to human connection. It's not Bluetooth. Speakers are plugged right into the record player, right? So there's a connection, and then and I don't want that mediated by really. I wish we were having this conversation in your office, and this is where I love technology. You and I would have never had this conversation any other way. So, but I think if we disconnect that too much, it gets a little bit dangerous in communities, and then the wisdom over worldview, getting to know people, getting to know what they think, no shortcuts, no sloppy thinking, no two-dimensional people. And then and I know I used a weird word there, right? Irenic policing, that comes from my seminary time. Taking actions which move you towards peace. And that's what makes the community flourish, right? And then you said the core competency, and then the whole community shape. So you like your app through USAA. That doesn't mean everybody does.
Right.
And I feel like we got to offer both. You know what I mean?
But like a lot of cops, I always think I'm right.
Right. Well, and we think everything. We think everybody thinks like us. I've been in law enforcement, for 25 years. I might have called the police in my personal life twice, and as you well know, that's probably, somewhat rare.
Yeah. So, if we go back, let's close this part of the conversation out. Well, I guess we'll segue into another one, but in closing the chapter on this, would you agree though that if we can eliminate administrative tasks that we typically assign people to do with a technology that does not interfere with the officer's ability to interface with people, would you say that that's a win? And I'll give you an example. So body cameras, we're wearing body cameras now, whether we like them or dislike them. I mean, they're prolific in policing. I think the last I saw was over 70% of police departments had them, and just about all of them were moving towards them at some point. A feature that does auto transcription. And these are kind of some of the things that where I think the technology is ultimately going to lead us. Because what happens in any interaction, let's just say the officer does go, if it's a traffic crash, or let's just say someone steals something out of their car, while it's in their driveway overnight, one of the, common type of call. So the officer shows up, he's going to do a basic investigation. Well, I should say in most police departments, someone will still show up. In a lot of metropolitan areas, they won't anymore. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I think there's the potential for a little bit of both. But the officer is going to show up. They're going to break out their little notepad. They're going to say, "What's your name?" They're going to confirm an address, a date of birth, stuff like that. So we're catching these data points. What kind of car is this? Oh, it's a 1999, I don't know, Ford truck. Here's the plate number. But because of the way our CAD systems are built, I also have to get the VIN number. I've got to get the identifiers on that. And now, okay, here was the damage. Here's what was taken. Oh, my laptop was stolen out of there. Do you have the serial number on the laptop? Well, no, I don't. Yes, in some, most cases they won't. In some cases they do. So you're collecting all these data points and you're writing this stuff down in your notepad. And then what happens from there is after you do your basic, do you have any idea who did it? No. Do you have a doorbell camera or a security camera? No. Do your neighbors have one? Well, maybe, but you'll have to check. So now I go knock on a few doors. And these are all things that I'm collecting for my police report that I'm going to document. And then when I finish with that, if there's nothing else to follow up on, I'm going to drive somewhere. In most police departments, I'm just going to sit in my car. I'm going to take out my little trusty notepad and I'm going to go in the name field, John Smith, date of birth, white male. And I'm going to go through all these mandated areas that I have to fill out. And then I'm going to go into the property fields and fill out, and then the vehicle fields. So I literally will sit there for 15 to 20 minutes sometimes before I even get to, on the above date and time, I, Officer Flannelly, responded to this address on the report of a theft from a vehicle. And then, so then you're typing your narrative. And at the end of that, you hit click, send. A supervisor is going to get it and they're going to review it. And they're either going to approve or they're going to reject it, or they might send it back to you. It says, "Hey, you didn't put the VIN number of the car in here," or something. So these clerical tasks, administrative tasks, take a lot of time. And so here's where I'm coming at you from. What I think where technology can really help us if in the ability to auto transcribe, grab information and put it in required fields. At the end of that call, the officer, rather than having to fill out all those fields, literally just reads the transcription. And they even have AI tools now that will summarize the transcription, and they read it and say, "Yep, that's a clear and accurate representation of what I did." They can confirm that all the data fields are entry done. They're moving on. So now there's 20 minutes of administrative tasks that we've taken out of the officer's hands. So that's where I say that time now can be used more productively. Instead of sitting in a car typing in these fields, now we free up that time. And now the big question is what do we do with that time that we're freeing up, right? Do we reinvest it into our core issues? Like in this case, let's just say there is a chance to do some follow-up, but in a lot of police departments, I've got 4 more calls waiting for me. The chances of me following up on that are 0. And so I don't follow up on it. Now there's a missed opportunity, and that crime, the person that committed that crime, we know is going to keep committing those crimes until they're caught. And so, the whole point that I make is if I can catch the guy that's breaking into cars after he's done 50 or 100 versus 200 to 300, how much organizational time have I saved? And then where do I reinvest that time? So that's my pitch on efficiency. And I know you don't like that word.
And I agree. No, well, I agree with everything you're saying. And you think I'm an idealist. Like maybe that's the problem, is I'm a cynic about it. You actually think that by saving that time, it will get productively used for the greater good. And I guess I'm a little more cynical about it, where I think it'll get filled with a bunch of nothingness or more tasks. But no,
Well, this is where I'll get you with phase 2 of my plan.
As long as we're not.
I'm sorry, we're glitching a little bit.
As long as we're not. Yeah, as long as we're not naive enough to believe that won't then start to reshape the entire profession in every way. So it'll go from accidents to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. Then when it doesn't work right, we'll be all pissed off about it and we'll say it's all trash. Or when it gets a little bit off. So you mentioned like the AI writing, and I know that's all the rage. But the beauty of writing is composition. Like the article you read that I wrote, Patrick, that came from my soul.
Right.
I didn't just plug a bunch of books into AI and say, arrange this at an 8th grade reading level with this kind of general idea, right? Like I had to strain that out. And so I guess that's what I think is, in the example you gave, who wouldn't say yes to that? But then, how do we fight it on the next thing? You and I.
Yeah. Well, no, I agree too. I mean, this is some of the, and I think we talked about this on our pre-call, right? These are some of the dangers of technology, because what's the best way to become a better writer? There's only one way. You have to write. And so if we automate a tool, then are we losing our ability to train our critical thinking? I mean, because writing is a part of that process, and it really makes you think through what you did and why. It requires time for self-reflection, accuracy, memory, all of these things. So, again, I think this is where you have to look at, what are some of the just rote tasks that machines can do. And let's go back to the example that we had in our first conversation. And this is part of where I think we really strongly agree with each other, in that in 1995, when the first time I stepped into a squad car, I had a mobile radio, an old radar, right? Like a 4-cell flashlight, and I was told you go patrol the city, right? There was no computer in my car. If I had to navigate, there was no GPS map on my phone. I had a map book, which meant that I had to memorize the city, because if there's an emergency call, the last thing any person that's in a house that's bleeding to death wants, or needs CPR, is you as a police officer, staring at your map book, trying to figure out, how do I even get there? I don't even know where this place is, right? So a lot of time that, training young officers back in the 80s and 90s was really about training them how to navigate where, the city, right? From a geography, and then from a traffic flow. So all these things, and we put computers in cars because that was supposed to make things more efficient, right? I agree with you there. And what we did was we eliminated tasks, but we created 3 more for everyone that we eliminated. And therein lies the danger of using technology to replace a job that people can do, because I had this conversation with the CEO of one of these major players. I'm not going to say any names, but when they made these rollouts for some of the technology that they were implementing, he just happened to be sitting at the same table with me, and I just asked him. I said, "Hey, with all these efficiencies that we're gaining," I was like, "Have you considered the danger that you might run into, in that when you go to a police chief and tell them that I can give you a technology that will allow you to be 50% more efficient, and then that word gets to a city council or a chief budget officer, what's the first thing that they're going to think in their mind? Well, that means we need less
police officers."
And so no chief in their right mind is going to make the sell like, oh, well, yeah, that's what I want. What I really want is to do this job with 500 officers instead of 1,000. No. So that's where you have to really make sure that you're keeping, a firm eye on the ball in terms of what we want is to be able to make our officers, we want to free up the time so we can invest in the things that matter the most to us and our community. So back into the squad car, what we created was this environment of, my first FTO, I wasn't allowed to have my window rolled up, right? My window had to be rolled down. I had to be able to hear,
Right.
see, smell, just get a feel for the areas where I was. And we driving through these neighborhoods, he's waving at everybody. People are like yelling at him, calling him by name. And so what happens when now you've got a computer in there and you get dispatched to a call, the windows are up, the air conditioning's on, and and the saying is right, you're driving, you're not a part of the neighborhood, you're apart from the neighborhood. You're just passing through from one call to another. And we may get to the next call faster in a more efficient way, but we're disconnecting ourselves from these communities that we live in, and that leads to that eventually, right, does lead to that separation. And we've seen it play out with our own kids on social media and cell phones and video games. Drive by a park in your neighborhood. How many kids are out using the parks?
And we see it with new officers. I'm sure you've seen this too, where they have trouble with face-to-face engagement because they're used to so many mediated engagements. We almost have to teach them how to talk to people. This is why I've actually started to do a lot of hiring out of the customer service industry. So an officer we hired a few years back, think about this. He's a Caucasian native English speaker, and he's working in a Hispanic-owned restaurant industry surrounded by people whose primary language is Spanish. You see why I hired that guy?
Oh, absolutely.
If he can survive and learn how to communicate in that environment, there's nothing he can't handle on the street.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, those are rare. What we more see is folks who are used to so much electronic mediation that they have trouble connecting with people in real life, and that you'll never get rid of that. You'll never get rid of going to talk to a person about a high intensity event, them being upset, them needing comfort, them needing counseling, them needing engagement. And I feel like we're cutting our legs out from under us with all of it. And like you and I talked about with the GPS, so I didn't have that either. I barely use it now. But one of the first things you learned as a rookie patrolman was how to set up a perimeter. And how'd you do that? You pulled out your map, you looked up the locations, and you said, I need a unit here, 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 and here. Now that we only use GPS, nobody knows what's around them. We just know how to go from A to B.
Yeah. So I'll give you another. So, I worked with a group out of Purdue University it was a Department of Homeland Security initiative. It was DHS post 9/11. They had these, what they call Center of Excellences, and they worked with STEM universities, Purdue being one of them. And the first project I was working with this PhD student on was a mapping tool, kind of like what most people have seen in like crimereports.com and some of these other public facing tools, that map, that basically are a public blotter, where people can see where things occurred or whatever. But that tool has evolved. They have a company that's spun up out of that. It's called DaVista Technologies, and they have a platform called Heimall, which goes back to this real-time crime center environment. But one of the very first features that I kind of talked to him about building in there is, and again, it just came up because you mentioned it, is setting up a perimeter. Because it's becoming a lost art. Like you're really making sure that, and so he actually built on, built-in algorithms into this software. So if you can plug it in, if the suspect fled on foot or if they fled in a vehicle, and how long from the time of dispatch till the time you got, it will actually create a perimeter on your map for where it needs to be. And so now an officer that's driving doesn't even have to, they don't have to have it memorized. All they have to do is
Right.
look on a map, and then everybody that's on their way can see where they are in relationship to everyone else. And so people can self-deploy right to, to the perimeter spots. Now you still have to teach them, you know, the theories about choke points and terrain and stuff like that. But it's, I mean,
Right.
it just goes to the point, right? Well, how much can we automate? And then the concern becomes, at what point, when these things skip generations, like I'm teaching the generation behind me and they're teaching the next one, and now we lose the reason. Well, why do we even do this in the first place? And when people don't understand why,
Right.
well, and that's what happens in policing all the time. Why are we doing this? Well, that's because we've always done it that way. And I'll go back to this post yesterday that kind of got us all started, a different post, but about physical fitness standards and beards and tattoos. These arguments about, should police officers be allowed to have beards and tattoos? And it's almost all driven, it's divided by these lines, and um, really just in uh, beliefs that have been generational, passed through the military and other reasons. My whole thing is like, yeah, I think you don't want to lower standards, but you also have to challenge your own thoughts when you see things like that. Like, does a person
Yes.
with a beard and a tattoo, um, you know, are they going to be any less effective as a police officer than a person without facial hair and no tattoos? Well, now we start talking about perceptions, and well, half the community doesn't like that.
Right.
Well, guess what? The other half of the community does. So, so who gets to
Right.
decide? And yeah, these are fun things that you have to work through. And I was a military guy, so for me, even when I did, change our
Right.
policy late in my tenure to be able to allow to have beards, I personally had a really hard time. Like, we would do no shave November, and I had a hard time putting on a uniform when I was participating in that, because I was like, I can't be in uniform with facial hair. Like, there was a part of me that was just like, nope, nope, nope. And so it took me a while to kind of say, and I've talked about this in the past, so I won't belabor the point. But in the end, people wanted them. They wanted to be able to grow goatees and beards and have tattoos, and we eventually changed the policy. And one of my biggest concerns was, how is this going to be perceived in the public? What are people going to think? And guess how many calls I got and how many complaints I got?
None.
Zero. Not like,
Yeah.
people were like, "Oh,
Well, and
I didn't even know cops weren't
yeah.
allowed to have beards." That's dumb.
Well, but when you were talking about earlier, we were talking about insulin resistance in law enforcement, and it made me think of technology being ecological. So insulin resistance driven by fast food, processed food, simple carbohydrates, lots of sugar. So what if I were to tell you that that's the microwave's fault? But when we got the microwave, it was going to be a time saver and it was going to be convenient, but then it starts to shape the food ecosystem around it. And I don't know, just to me, that's kind of like what, you know.
Well, there's been research done on that, right? Because it goes back to the
Yeah,
1950s and the tray table foods, right? You ask a kid what a tray table is, and they'll be like, I don't know.
exactly.
Like, and then they eventually became TV tables.
Yeah,
I mean, every house had them, right? You had the one that sat next to the TV or somewhere in your family room. So like
right.
on a cool or special night, like that's the way it worked around. Like if the circumstances, if all the stars aligned, then mom and dad would let you, eat in front of the television, which was like, that was a rarity. But now
Right, right,
so and for people that don't know what they are, right? There are these little folding trays that you take off of the stand and you unfold it, kind of like you would maybe in a classroom somewhere, and you put it in front of a chair in your living room, and now you can put your TV dinner on top of the tray table and watch TV while you eat.
right.
And so I kind of, it makes me laugh now because I think about, we have a big open family room that's connected to our kitchen, and I've got a 65-inch TV hanging on the wall above the fireplace, and I can sit in the kitchen and watch the TV if I want,
Right.
But
Well, but that one piece of amazing technology
it's a great point.
reshaped the entire ecosystem around it. You want to talk about seeing like a state?
Yeah, absolutely. But I do want to, let's close this out because I agree with you, right? And like, this is an
Okay.
example of where technology, where it becomes a detriment, not a benefit. And it is the unintended downstream consequence of trying to make life easier. And by making life easier, what we've done is we've made life shorter. And for 4 years in a row now,
Yeah.
in the United States, lifespan has decreased. First time in history of the Western world that lifespans are decreasing. And that's a huge driver in it.
Wow.
So anyway, I digress. Yes, policing and seeing. We've already been going for over an hour, so let's spend a little bit of time chatting on this, and then we're gonna have to start thinking about episode 2.
One of the things that shaped two things that shaped my thinking. Number one, an author named Neil Postman. He wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, and he wrote a book called Technopoly. And this is how technology is overcoming culture. I think these are must reads. These are not hard books, but this is how I'm going to convert people to my way of thinking. And,
All right.
and so to get them to see the problem. But the other one, the one we talked about was Seeing Like a State. And this is not an easy read, not for the faint of heart, but he makes a phenomenal point. And what he talks about is when, I guess maybe in the 19th century, Germany is experiencing a lumber shortage, and they're trying to catalog their forests so they can make good estimates and so they can be more efficient. So they went out and they started counting the trees, what type, how big, to make these estimates. Well, they decided that was super inefficient. So what they did was start to plant exactly what they wanted. So it went from extracting information to tell them about this natural ecosystem to overlaying what they wanted onto the world. And what they did in the process was basically lose the forest. And you've seen this in movies. I'm trying to think. There's that Tom Cruise movie about where they're trying to overthrow Hitler, and they're going to the bunker, and the trees are perfectly aligned, right? You see this in movies all the time. Patrick, that's not a forest. That's a tree farm, right? A forest has undergrowth, has animals in it, has fallen trees, has deer, right? It has it's this whole ecosystem. And so now take that and think about a community where we're taking information from a community to try to understand it. And then now we're trying to shape the community according to patterns that we think should be there. And so we start, instead of extracting the data and using it to engage, we start overlaying the data. And you've seen this. I'll give an example. Like, we take statistical fields and we say, hey, there's too much of this here. There's too much of that there. We need to bring these numbers down. Now, you might say, John, give me a break. That also increases safety. That's not how you're thinking about it. That might be how the victims are thinking about it, but that's not how you're thinking about it. You're thinking about it purely as a statistical point. And I think it's dangerous. And that's his point, is we start to erase the character and culture and engagement. And everything just becomes this kind of theory X, hitting the stopwatches, making sure everything is nice and efficient and smooth. You know where this comes up too? When people are frustrated about the speed on their roadway. So they'll call the state roadway management agency, whose name I don't want to say specifically, and they'll say, hey, this is dangerous. There are kids out here this speed needs to be lowered. And they're always shocked that they won't do it, because that's not what they do. They are engineers of movement. They care about movement and how efficient the movement is to move vehicles from point A to point B. I'm not saying they're totally blind to the human dimension. I'm just saying that's not what they do. And so that's another example, right? Like there's people living on the road, and there's kids, and there's churches, and there's this, and in the humanistic mind, that should create an adjustment. But if we're simply looking at it from a traffic management, traffic engineering standpoint, people can go 80 through there completely safely. I don't know. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. And I think ultimately the lesson here is be careful about what you're asking for, right? And I do think that that's something that we, and it's not just in policing, right? It's everywhere. But the unintended consequences, like the example that you give for like deforestation issues and concerns. I just happen to live, Purdue has one of the biggest agronomy departments in the country, right? So they do have tree farms. So when you use that example we were talking about the other day, I know off the top of my head multiple places within a 5-minute drive from here where I can go. And when you're driving along, it's very eye capturing, right? So it's like perfectly symmetrical as you're driving through, and it does kind of, but it's not like the same, 150 acres where I bow hunt, right? So when I'm walking through that environment is completely different. Like, why do some trees survive? Why do some not, right?
Right.
And it's kind of like
and only one of them is a forest, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Right. So I think that really does kind of tie back into what we were talking about earlier, right? I think maybe that's why you're bringing it up, is the ecosystem. We just really have to be intentional and careful about what we're, about how we're using technology and why. Because I think from a policing ecosystem, what generally tends to happen, or what can happen, and I'll go back to the example of the laptops in the car, right? When we first went to these mobile terminals, we had officers that fought it. Like, I don't need a computer telling me how to do my job, right? I'm not using.
And dispatchers fought it hard too.
Oh, everybody.
Yeah, dispatchers fought it hard too.
But then within a year or two of adapting to it, then the mobile terminal goes down. I'm sorry, dispatch, I can't go. My computer's not working. And then you start to hear things on the radio, literally like, my computer won't let me. So it's, yeah.
Right. I was just going to say, it's so funny that you say that. It's so funny you say that, because I'm going to ask you to think about something. Do you work for your phone, or does your phone work for you? Because I will argue you are its slave. You will do anything it tells you to do. When it's hungry, you'll feed it. When it wants to talk, you'll talk to it. You know what I mean? But that's the same thing, right? My computer won't let me.
Yeah. So I, one of the things I do now in my post law enforcement career, I do coaching. And I went through a program, and I wish I'd have gone through this program years ago, but it's through a group called the Flow Collective Research. But they have a program called Distraction Disruptor, and it was a week-long course on, maybe it was 10 days, just looking at the technology that's on your phone and how to utilize it, how to interact with it. But one of the things that it does is it teaches you how to track how much time you're actually spending on your phone, all the notifications, really the processes that are set up, again, just to go to your point, right? All the things that are supposed to make you more efficient. And one of the things that's on, and everyone, if you don't do this, you should turn on the feature that tracks your screen time. And there are apps out there that do it. I think Apple even has one on there. I use a third-party app, but where you get a daily report and a weekly report about what your screen time was. And I was on vacation 2 weeks ago for a week, and then last week was my first week back. Even though I work from home, I got my weekly report. I was like, holy shit! Like, there it goes. Like, that screen time was up like over 3 hours per day. Like that. So that just goes to show you how much. Now, listen, like, there are, like, if you like, I do a lot of emails and stuff like that on my phone now. I'd rather sit in a comfortable chair looking out the window or something than maybe sitting at my desk. But I don't necessarily know that that's the most efficient way. But so here, and here's maybe another way of saying this, and then we can kind of wrap up our conversation for today. But one of the things that I learned in the first time I worked with a coach was, he asked me the question. He's like, "Hey, what's the first thing you do in the morning when you wake up?" And I was like, "Probably like most people, I go to the bathroom." He was like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, and he was like, "What kind of alarm do you use?" And I was like, "I have an alarm on my phone." Oh, so when your phone alarm goes off, like, he's like, and this was when I was working. He's like, "What do you do when you have the phone in your hand?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm looking to see if I missed, are there any messages or any emails that came in overnight?" So I found myself doing that before I even get out of bed to go use the bathroom. And so I don't care how organized and structured you are, like, you can read the Atomic Habits 100 times, right? And you can think about, all right, hey, at the end of each day, I'm going to write down the 3 things that I accomplished and 3 things that I'm going to get done tomorrow that are my highest priority. But then if the first thing I do in the morning is I wake up and I see something on my phone that completely shifts my mindset, now I'm like you said, I'm working for my phone and I'm not working for me. Now, of course, some of those things are going to be unavoidable, but yeah, like, so I learned, just I shifted my whole morning routine, everything I did. I use a different alarm clock. I'm not sponsored by Hatch, but I bought this alarm clock by a company called Hatch. It does have an app that you can set through your phone, but you don't have to use your phone to use it. And it'll wake you up to light and different sounds. But I don't have to grab my phone. I'll still, if I've got to wake up for something important, I'll still set a secondary alarm on my phone. But yeah, so yeah, I get up. Yeah. And then I use the bathroom before I do anything else. And then I stretch. And then I do a meditation session, and then I read. I do, and that, when you brought up meditations, right? That Meditations was a book that I read in that, doing that process. I would just read, a few pages a day, just some light reads, and then I do a little bit of journaling. And it literally changed. It changed the way that I really approach my day. So a little bit of a tangent, but to answer your question, yes. I think most of us are slaves to our phones.
Yeah. Well, but no, part of what you're getting at is, and I do many of the same things, right? I hit the gym in the morning. I read. I have a leadership journal. I write things down in, and I review that constantly. And that's deep learning. The use of technology has created, in my mind, in many ways, a surface learning, where if I read the Wikipedia on something, suddenly I'm an expert. And there's no like saturation where we're kind of mulling things over and engaging with them on a deeper level. And that goes to human relationships too, right? Like, how dare you call me? Why didn't you text me? Because I don't want to know you that well. And so, right, I don't know. I think it all plays into the whole ecology of all of it. And so I don't know, but Patrick, I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope there's some sensibleness to it. I don't know. I think we could probably do part 2 through 10, because there's just, in policing, there's a constant confrontation over and over again with the new. I'm going to pick on, we were talking about the history of policing and the different things that have been used. Think of all the newfangled gadgets that you used in your career that are now in the display case. And then think about what actually remains. All the basic stuff.
All right. I think that's probably a great way to end this segment. Yeah, we covered a lot of ground. You know what? I was just looking at my notes, and we had about 4 segments that, we wanted to talk about: strategy and community engagement, the future of policing. We touched a little bit on those.
Well, I was trying to look at it.
Yeah, we touched on a little bit of everything, but we'll definitely have to look at.
Yeah, I was trying to do it, and then when you go back and watch it, Yeah, if you go back and watch it and it's too choppy, maybe it's just on my end, but it seemed, and I noticed some lag a couple of times. So I don't know if you can pull some of that lag out. And yeah, I think we were just maybe rambling too much, and I was trying to keep us on script.
Well, I appreciate that because
But no, this
I've
is a
been known to be a
company.
rambler. All right. Well, everyone, I really do
Well,
appreciate your
no, because
time,
here's the
and
thing.
we're experiencing a little bit of lag, and I did get a notification from my internet provider that they've got problems in my area. So if we listen to this and it turns out to be too choppy, we'll re-record it down the road. But just my closing thoughts. I really do appreciate John taking the time to chat with us today. I think he brings up some really important considerations when we consider the implementation of new technologies into policing, and really ultimately what it boils down to is the protecting that interface between humans and technology, and making sure that we're always focusing on a really a people-centric approach. And because if the people don't feel like they're valued and we're not there for them, then I think we've kind of lost our purpose. And I think my hope is that as we integrate new technologies, we find ways to make sure that we work with it, not against it, and also balance the needs of our agencies with the needs of our communities. And we're probably going to make some mistakes as we plow through with some new tech, but I also think we're going to find some really cool things, and the future of policing is exciting. So John, you get last word here, and also please let us know if someone's got questions for you. Where can they find some of your readings and writings, and maybe get in touch with you?
So, Patrick, again, I appreciate the opportunity. I know this type of conversation is not the normal thing, but I think it's an important one. And so, the only social media presence I have is on LinkedIn, so you can find me there at John Patrick Clair. I'm the chief of police of the town of Marion. I do a lot of book recommendations there, make some videos on stuff that I like. And if you also just kind of Google the town of Marion, Virginia Police Department, you can come up with my email address. And certainly, if anybody had anything they wanted to reach out about, or wanted to give me an opportunity to argue with them against about, again, I try to be the loyal opposition. But man, I love this conversation, and I think it's healthy for all of us to really think about, and I think it'll keep us honest as we look for it. Because you're right, there's no stopping technology. It's autonomous, right? We are well beyond the the period of time where we really can do much about it, right? It's a chain reaction, but that doesn't mean that we can't prick our conscience about it, and it doesn't mean we can't also make sure we're making the investments in it.
Awesome. Thanks again. Until our next time, and our next episode will be 1042.